The skies above Illyra Prime once shimmered with an ethereal glow, a world of endless sapphire oceans and cities that floated like delicate jewels in the air. The planet was a masterpiece of peace and beauty, its people known for their love of art, science, and exploration. But now, the heavens were painted with streaks of crimson fire, the serenity shattered by the relentless assault of the ZYRR Dominion. Massive warships, their dark, angular hulls bristling with weapons, descended through the atmosphere like predators closing in on prey. Explosions rippled across the horizon, tearing apart the floating cities that had graced the skies for centuries. The once pristine waters below reflected the chaos above, their surfaces broken by waves of fire and smoke. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and the distant, mournful cries of a civilization on the brink of collapse. In the heart of the city of Vithar, a place once known for its towering crystalline spires, Dr. Solana Eris stood frozen in her laboratory. Her violet eyes, wide with fear, darted between the trembling walls and the frantic figures of her colleagues. The floor beneath her feet shuddered as another explosion rocked the city, sending a cascade of glass shards raining down from the ceiling. The once sterile laboratory was now a chaotic mess of overturned equipment and flashing warning lights. Solana, an esteemed xenobiologist, had devoted her life to studying the mysteries of the galaxy. But nothing in her years of research had prepared her for this. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of a console, her mind racing. Around her, the other scientists worked desperately to activate the Starvale beacon, an ancient relic of Illyran ingenuity. The device, a towering structure of gleaming silver and pulsating blue energy, was their last hope. The beacon hummed to life, its core beginning to glow with a faint, otherworldly light. Solana stepped forward, her voice shaking but resolute. She pressed her hand to the activation panel, and the room fell silent except for the low, rhythmic thrum of the machine. "This is Dr. Solana Eris of the Illyran Commonwealth," she began, her voice carrying the weight of desperation. "Our world is under attack by the ZYRR Dominion. They have destroyed our colonies and now target our home. We are not warriors, we are scholars and explorers. If anyone can hear this, we beg for your help." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she forced herself to remain composed. The beacon responded with a surge of energy, its light intensifying as it sent her plea across the vast, unfeeling void of space. The room was bathed in a soft blue glow, but outside, the sky burned red and orange, a stark reminder of the devastation unfolding around them. Solana let her hand fall from the console and turned to her assistant, Kaler, a young Illyran whose silver hair was matted with sweat. His usually calm demeanor was replaced with an expression of quiet terror. "Do you think anyone will come?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the distant rumble of destruction. Solana's gaze drifted to the laboratory window, where the city beyond was a shadow of its former self. Buildings crumbled under the weight of ZYRR bombardments, their crystalline structures collapsing like fragile sculptures. The sky was alive with the silhouettes of ZYRR ships, their dark forms blotting out the stars. For a moment, she couldn't bring herself to answer. What hope did they have? The galaxy was vast, and the Illyrans were but one small voice among countless others. And yet, as she watched the beacon pulse steadily, its light unwavering in the face of chaos, she found a flicker of resolve. "We have no choice but to hope," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. Kaler nodded, though his expression remained grim. Outside, the ZYRR fleet continued its unrelenting assault, their weapons carving through the last of the Illyran defenses. The ground shuddered again, and the lights in the laboratory flickered. Solana clenched her fists, her mind racing with the weight of what they had done. Their message was out there now, a desperate cry for help sent into the infinite darkness. Would anyone hear it? Would anyone care? As the Starvale beacon continued to hum, its light cutting through the smoke-filled air, Solana could only hope that somewhere, across the endless expanse of stars, anyone was listening. Far beyond the chaos-consuming Illyra Prime, Earth floated in the quiet void of space, a pale blue jewel surrounded by the cold darkness of the cosmos. On the orbital defense nexus, a massive station suspended above Earth's surface, the air was tense. The distress signal from Illyra Prime had arrived hours ago, its haunting plea now echoing through the station's command chambers like the ghost of a distant tragedy. The voice of Dr. Solana Eris, trembling yet resolute, played on repeat. Our world is under attack by the ZYRR Dominion. If anyone can hear this, we beg for your help. The words hung in the air, heavy with desperation, as if the message carried the weight of an entire civilization's last hope. Commander Alina Drake stood at the center of the chamber, her sharp, calculating eyes fixed on the holographic projection of Illyra Prime. The image showed a vibrant world now engulfed in flames, its once brilliant oceans obscured by dark clouds of smoke. Alina was a woman of action, her presence commanding respect. Her uniform, adorned with the insignia of the United Earth Vanguard, seemed to reflect her unyielding resolve. Yet, even she felt the gravity of the decision before them. Around her, the Council of Nations, Earth's governing body, argued fiercely. The chamber was a grand hall of steel and glass, its walls lined with banners representing Earth's many nations. The voices of the council members overlapped, a cacophony of fear, doubt, and debate. This could be a trap, growled Admiral Victor Kane, his deep, gravelly voice cutting through the noise. He was an imposing man, his presence as heavy as his words. We know nothing about these Illyrans or this ZYRR Dominion. For all we know, we're walking into someone else's war. Why should we risk our people for a species we've never even met? A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Several council members nodded, their faces etched with worry. The Admiral's words carried weight, and his caution was not without reason. Humanity had only recently ventured into the stars, and the unknown was a dangerous place. Alina's jaw tightened as she listened. She could feel the fear in the room, the hesitation that threatened to paralyze them. But fear was a luxury they couldn't afford. She stepped forward, her boots echoing against the polished floor, and the chamber fell silent. When Alina Drake spoke, people listened. And if it's not a trap, she asked, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension like a blade. If they're innocent, if they're truly in need, and we do nothing, what does that say about us? Humanity has always dreamed of finding others among the stars. Now, the first thing we hear is a cry for help. If we ignore it, we betray everything we stand for. Her words lingered in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken fears and the echoes of Solana's plea. Alina's gaze swept over the room, her eyes meeting those of the council members one by one. She saw doubt in some, fear in others, but also a flicker of something deeper, hope, perhaps, or the faint memory of the ideals they had sworn to uphold. This isn't just about the Illyrans, she continued, her voice softening but losing none of its conviction. This is about who we are. If we turn away now, we tell the galaxy that humanity is selfish, that we only care about ourselves. But if we answer this call, if we stand up for those who cannot defend themselves, we show the galaxy that humanity is a force for good. A force worth remembering. The room fell into a profound stillness. Even Admiral Kane, whose face remained stern, seemed to consider her words. The hologram of Elira Prime continued to rotate slowly in the center of the chamber, its burning surface a stark reminder of the stakes. Finally, President Elena Marlowe, the leader of the council, rose from her seat. She was a woman of quiet strength, her silver hair framing a face that had seen decades of conflict and compromise. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and deliberate. "Commander Drake is right," she said, her words carrying the authority of a leader who understood the weight of her decision. "Humanity must answer this call not as conquerors, but as protectors. We cannot let fear dictate our actions. If we have the power to help, then we have the responsibility to act." A ripple of agreement spread through the council. One by one, the members nodded, their earlier doubts giving way to a shared sense of purpose. The decision had been made. Humanity would not stand idle while another world burned. Alina felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. This would not be an easy mission. The ZYRR Dominion was an unknown enemy, and the risks were immense. But she also felt a deep sense of pride. This was the humanity she believed in, a humanity that fought not for power, but for justice. As the council adjourned, the chamber emptied, leaving Alina alone with the hologram of Elira Prime. She stared at the burning planet, her mind already racing with plans and strategies. Somewhere out there, an entire civilization was counting on them. And she would not let them down. With a final glance at the hologram, Alina turned and strode from the chamber, her heart heavy but resolute. Humanity had made its choice. Now, it was time to act. The UES Resolute cut through the vast emptiness of space like a spear of light, its sleek, angular hull glinting faintly under the distant shimmer of stars. It was Earth's pride, its most advanced warship, a vessel forged not just for war, but for hope. Behind it trailed a fleet of 40 ships, their engines glowing like embers in the infinite blackness. Together, they moved as one, a fragile thread of humanity venturing into the unknown. Inside the Resolute, the air was thick with a mixture of anticipation and unease. The hum of the ship's engines was a constant presence, a low, steady rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of its crew. In the main command deck, Captain Arlen Voss stood before his officers, his tall frame silhouetted against the glowing star charts that dominated the room. His face, weathered by years of service, was calm but resolute, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of his crew. "We don't know what lies ahead," he began, his voice steady and measured, carrying the weight of both authority and reassurance. "But we do know this: the galaxy is watching. If we succeed, we prove that humanity is more than just another species. We become a force for good. A force that stands for something greater than survival." The room was silent, save for the faint hum of machinery. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Around him, officers exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of determination and unease. They were venturing into uncharted territory, answering a call from a species they had never met, to face an enemy they knew nothing about. But in their hearts, they carried the hope that this mission was more than just a battle, it was a statement of who they were. As the fleet sped through hyperspace, the swirling streams of light outside the windows created an almost hypnotic effect. Time felt strange here, stretched thin by the endless void. Days and hours blurred together, the only markers of time being the steady routines of the crew. Yet, amidst the monotony of the journey, a sudden alert broke the stillness. "Captain, we've detected a vessel ahead," came the voice of the communications officer, her tone sharp with urgency. "It's drifting. No power signatures." Arlen's brow furrowed as he stepped toward the main display. The holographic projection showed a lone ship, its design alien but elegant, floating lifelessly in the void. Its once luminous hull was scarred and blackened, its edges jagged where pieces had been torn away. It was like a wounded bird, adrift and helpless. "Bring us closer," Arlen ordered, his voice calm but firm. "Prepare an away team." As the Resolute approached, the scale of the damage became clear. The ship was massive, its surface dotted with intricate patterns that glowed faintly, like the remnants of a dying ember. But its beauty was marred by the signs of violence: deep gashes in the hull, scorch marks from energy weapons, and debris floating in its wake. An away team boarded the vessel, their footsteps echoing through the silent corridors. The air was cold, heavy with the metallic tang of burned machinery. Shadows danced across the walls, cast by the flickering remnants of emergency lights. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of their equipment. Then, they found them, the survivors. Huddled together in the ship's central chamber, the Illyrans were a haunting sight. Their luminous skin, which seemed to shimmer faintly even in the dim light, was pale with exhaustion. Their eyes, large and expressive, were filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Among them was Dr. Solana Eris, her once pristine robes torn and stained, her violet eyes wide with disbelief as she looked up at the humans who had come for them. "You came," she whispered, her voice trembling as if she could barely believe her own words. "You actually came." Arlen knelt before her, his expression softening as he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're here to help," he said, his voice steady and warm. "You're safe now. But we need to know. Tell us everything you can about the ZYRR Dominion." Solana's hands trembled as she clutched a small, glowing device, a piece of Illyran technology she had managed to save. Her voice was quiet at first, but as she spoke, it grew stronger, fueled by the urgency of her message. "The ZYRR," she began, her words heavy with both fear and anger. "They are not like us. They are a hive, a single mind spread across countless bodies, connected by a quantum neural network. They see themselves as the galaxy's rightful rulers, and they will stop at nothing to achieve their vision." Her gaze drifted, her expression darkening as she recalled the horrors she had witnessed. "They conquer, assimilate, and destroy. They do not negotiate. They do not show mercy. If they take Illyra, they will use our technology to expand their dominion. And once they have what they need, they will come for you." The room fell silent. The weight of her words was like a shadow, pressing down on everyone present. Arlen's jaw tightened, his mind racing as he processed the implications. This was not just a fight to save Illyra, this was a fight to stop a force that could consume the entire galaxy. But even in the face of such darkness, there was a spark of hope. Solana's eyes met Arlen's, and for the first time, there was something more than fear in her gaze. There was trust. "You don't understand what it means that you're here," she said, her voice breaking slightly. We thought no one would come. That we were alone." Arlen gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze, his expression resolute. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "Not anymore." As the survivors were brought aboard the Resolute, the ship's atmosphere shifted. The crew, once focused solely on the mission, now felt the weight of the lives they had saved. The Illyrans, fragile yet luminous, were a living reminder of what was at stake. And as the fleet continued its journey toward Illyra Prime, the humans and Illyrans alike shared a quiet understanding. They were no longer strangers. They were allies. And together, they would face the darkness ahead. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace like a storm breaking over Illyra Prime, the once beautiful planet now shrouded in the smoke of its dying defenses. Below, the surface burned with streaks of fire, cities reduced to glowing embers as ZYRR forces advanced relentlessly. Above, the blockade loomed, a wall of alien warships, their hulking forms blotting out the stars. The ZYRR vessels were monstrous, their jagged hulls bristling with cruel, spiked weapons. They moved with an eerie cohesion, as if driven by a single will, their dark silhouettes casting long shadows over the battlefield. Inside the Resolute, the tension was palpable. The crew stood at their stations, their faces pale but determined, illuminated by the ghostly blue glow of their instruments. Captain Arlen Voss stood at the center of the command deck, his hands gripping the edge of the console as he surveyed the chaos ahead. His voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the heavy silence. "All ships, form up," he barked, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. "Hit them hard and fast, don't give them time to react." The order spread through the fleet like a spark igniting dry tinder. The human ships surged forward, their engines blazing as they plunged into the fray. The smaller, sleeker vessels darted between the hulking ZYRR warships, their movements swift and precise. Beams of energy and volleys of missiles lit up the void, painting the battlefield in flashes of red and white. The human fleet fought like a pack of wolves against a towering predator, their speed and cunning their only advantage. The ZYRR, however, were relentless. Their ships moved with a terrifying unity, their weapons firing in perfect synchronization. The air seemed to hum with their presence, an unseen force binding them together. Each time a human ship managed to evade their fire, another ZYRR vessel would anticipate the movement, cutting off any escape. The battle was fierce, the void filled with the screams of dying ships and the flickering light of their final moments. From the Resolute's observation deck, the Illyrian refugees watched in silence. Their luminous eyes, wide with fear, reflected the carnage outside. Among them stood Solana Eris, her hands clasped tightly together as she stared at the battle unfolding before her. For a moment, hope flickered in her chest as she saw the human ships strike back, their courage and determination defying all odds. But that hope wavered as the ZYRR flagship emerged from the shadows. The Dreadspear was a nightmare given form. Its massive, spiked hull seemed to absorb the light around it, casting an unnatural darkness over the battlefield. Its weapons glowed with an ominous red light, like the embers of a dying star. With a single, devastating barrage, it unleashed its fury. Human ships were torn apart in an instant, their shattered remains drifting lifelessly into the void. The shock wave rippled through the fleet, shaking the Resolute to its core. On the command deck, alarms blared as damage reports flooded in. Voss gritted his teeth, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. He could see the tide turning against them. The ZYRR were too coordinated, too overwhelming. They couldn't hold out much longer. "Captain, we've lost the Vanguard and the Eclipse," an officer reported, her voice trembling. "The dread spires targeting our cruisers, our main fleet is breaking apart." Voss turned to Solana, who had been brought to the command deck at his request. Her luminous features were pale, her expression shadowed with fear. But Voss saw something else in her eyes, a spark of knowledge, a glimmer of something she hadn't yet revealed. "Solana," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Is there anything we can use to disrupt their coordination? Something to break their hive-mind connection?" Solana hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. For a moment, the only sound was the distant rumble of the ship's shields absorbing another impact. Then, slowly, she looked up, her voice trembling. "There is something," she admitted. "A prototype. We called it the quantum disruptor. It was designed to sever the ZYRR's neural network, to break their connection to the hive mind. But it's never been tested in combat. We don't even know if it works. Voss's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. The risk was enormous. Deploying an untested device in the middle of a battle could backfire catastrophically. But as he glanced at the tactical display, showing the dwindling strength of his fleet, he knew they had no other choice. "We don't have time to debate," he said firmly. "Prepare the device. We'll make it work." Solana hesitated, her hands trembling as she clutched the small, glowing device she had carried aboard. The quantum disruptor was no larger than a human heart, its surface etched with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with light. It was a fragile thing, almost delicate, yet it held the potential to turn the tide of the battle or doom them all. "Captain," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "If this fails..." "It won't," Voss interrupted, his tone leaving no room for doubt. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but steady. "We're not giving up. Not now. Not ever." Solana nodded, her fear giving way to determination. She handed the device to the ship's engineers, who rushed to integrate it into the Resolute systems. The air on the command deck was electric, every crew member holding their breath as the countdown began. Outside, the battle raged on. The Dreadspear loomed over the battlefield, its weapons charging for another devastating strike. The human fleet was in shambles, their formations broken, their ships scattered like leaves in a storm. But as the quantum disruptor came online, a strange energy began to ripple through the void. The device activated with a burst of light, a pulse of energy radiating outward like the toll of a great bell. For a moment, the ZYRR fleet hesitated, their movements faltering. The hive-mind connection wavered, their perfect coordination fracturing like glass under pressure. The human fleet seized the moment, rallying together to strike back with renewed ferocity. On the observation deck, the Illyrian refugees watched in awe as the tide began to turn. Solana's heart pounded in her chest as she saw the Dreadspear falter, its weapons falling silent. Hope surged through her veins, a fragile but brilliant light in the darkness. But the battle was far from over. The ZYRR were wounded, but they were not defeated. And as the Resolute pressed forward, its crew knew that the greatest challenge still lay ahead. The silence inside the Resolute was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the ship's engines as Major Elias Cade and his team prepared for what would likely be their final mission. The Marines stood in the dimly lit hangar bay, their faces shadowed beneath their helmets. Each of them carried the weight of what was to come, their eyes reflecting both fear and unyielding determination. They were venturing into the heart of the enemy, into the dark, twisted depths of the Dreadspear, to deliver the one weapon that could save them all. Major Cade stood at the front, his broad shoulders squared, his piercing gaze sweeping over his team. His voice, low and steady, cut through the tension like a blade. "We know what's waiting for us in there. The ZYRR won't stop. They'll fight us with everything they have. But we don't stop either. We push forward. We finish this." The Marines nodded silently, gripping their weapons tighter. Behind them, the quantum disruptor was secured in a reinforced case, its faint blue light casting eerie shadows on the walls. It was their last hope, a fragile device that could either save humanity or doom it. The Resolute maneuvered as close as it dared to the Dreadspear, its hull groaning under the strain of enemy fire. The massive ZYRR flagship loomed ahead like a nightmare brought to life, its jagged, blackened surface pulsing with an unnatural red glow. The boarding shuttle detached, slipping through the chaos of the battlefield like a shadow. Inside, The Marines sat in grim silence, the only sound the rhythmic thrum of the engines and the distant roar of explosions. When the shuttle breached the Dreadspire's hull, the atmosphere changed instantly. The air inside the alien ship was thick and oppressive, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of their throats. The walls seemed alive, their surfaces glistening with a dark, organic sheen. Pulsing veins of crimson light ran through the corridors, casting everything in an unearthly glow. It was as if the ship itself was a living entity, watching their every move. The moment the Marines stepped off the shuttle, the ZYRR attacked. The creatures emerged from the shadows with terrifying speed, their towering forms moving with an insectoid grace that was both alien and horrifying. Their chitinous bodies reflected the dim light, their razor-sharp limbs slicing through the air with deadly precision. Their eyes, glowing an unnatural red, burned with an intensity that sent a chill down the spine of even the bravest soldier. "Hold the line!" Cade roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. The Marines opened fire, their weapons lighting up the dark corridors with bursts of energy. The ZYRR screeched as they fell, their bodies collapsing in twisted heaps, but for every one that was killed, two more seemed to take its place. The air was filled with the acrid stench of burning flesh and the deafening clash of metal on metal as the Marines fought desperately to push forward. The battle was brutal. The ZYRR fought with a ferocity that defied comprehension, their movements so precise and coordinated that it felt like fighting a single, unrelenting force. But the humans were resourceful. They used every tool, every trick, every ounce of ingenuity to outmaneuver their foes. Grenades detonated in the narrow corridors, sending shock waves that threw the ZYRR back. Marines worked in pairs, covering each other as they advanced inch by bloody inch toward the ship's core. By the time they reached the central chamber, the team was battered and bloodied. The room was vast and alien, its walls lined with pulsating, organic structures that seemed to hum with energy. In the center stood the hive mind relay, a towering, grotesque construct that pulsed with a sickly red light. It was the heart of the Dreadspire, the source of the ZYRR's terrifying unity. "Set it up!" Cade barked, his voice hoarse from shouting. The Marines moved quickly, securing the quantum disruptor at the base of the relay. The device's blue light grew brighter as it powered up, its hum rising to a high-pitched whine that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. The ZYRR came at them in a final, desperate wave. The Marines formed a tight circle around the disruptor, their weapons blazing as they held the line. Cade fought like a man possessed, his blade slicing through the air as he cut down one creature after another. The air was thick with the scent of blood and burning metal, the screams of the dying echoing through the chamber. "Disruptors ready," one of the Marines shouted. Cade didn't hesitate. "Do it!" The device activated with a blinding flash of blue light, the pulse rippling outward like a wave crashing against the shore. The ZYRR froze mid-attack, their movements jerking and chaotic as the hive-mind connection was severed. The once coordinated swarm dissolved into disarray, their attacks becoming wild and uncoordinated. Some of them collapsed entirely, their bodies twitching as if their strings had been cut. On the Resolute, Captain Voss watched the battle unfold on the tactical display. The ZYRR fleet, once an unstoppable force, was now in chaos. Their ships drifted aimlessly, their weapons firing sporadically as the hive mind's control shattered. "Now's our chance," Voss said, his voice sharp with determination. "All ships, focus fire on the Dreadspire. Take it down." The human fleet unleashed everything they had. Missiles streaked across the void, their trails lighting up the darkness like falling stars. Energy beams lanced through the enemy ships, tearing through their weakened defenses. The dread spire's shields flickered and failed, its once imposing form now vulnerable. Inside the ship, Cade and his team fought their way back to the shuttle, the disruptor's pulse continuing to wreak havoc on the ZYRR. The corridors were littered with the bodies of their enemies, the once terrifying creatures now reduced to disorganized chaos. The Marines were exhausted, their movements sluggish, but the sight of the shuttle waiting for them at the breach filled them with a renewed sense of purpose. As the shuttle pulled away, the Dreadsphere began to collapse. Explosions rippled through its hull, sending debris spiraling into the void. The massive ship was engulfed in flames, its dark form consumed by the very chaos it had sought to spread. The remaining ZYRR ships, now leaderless and disoriented, began to retreat. The human fleet pursued them for a time, but it was clear the battle was over. The tide had turned, and for the first time, hope burned brightly in the hearts of those who had fought so desperately to survive. The skies above Illyra Prime were no longer filled with fire, but with a somber, eerie calm. The once beautiful planet, scarred by war, now lay beneath a blanket of smoke and ash. The faint glow of its cities, some still burning and others reduced to rubble, painted the surface in hues of orange and gray. The battle was over, but the silence that followed was not one of peace, it was the heavy, suffocating silence of loss. The Resolute drifted among the wreckage of the battlefield, its hull battered and scorched. Around it, the remnants of the human fleet floated like wounded animals, their lights flickering weakly against the vast darkness of space. The debris of fallen ships, both human and ZYRR, formed a graveyard that stretched as far as the eye could see. Twisted metal and shattered hulls drifted silently, the final resting place of countless lives. Inside the Resolute, the atmosphere was thick with grief. The crew moved quietly, their faces pale and their eyes hollow. They avoided meeting each other's gazes, as if the weight of their shared sorrow was too much to bear. The names of the fallen echoed through the ship's intercom, each one a dagger to the heart of those who had survived. Friends, comrades, mentors gone. The cost of victory had been steep. In the observation deck, a group of Illyran refugees stood in silence, their luminous eyes reflecting the devastation outside. Some wept softly, their tears falling like shimmering crystals onto the cold floor. Others stared blankly, their expressions numb. They had been saved, but their home was in ruins, their people scattered. The weight of survival was almost unbearable. On the bridge, Captain Voss stood alone, his silhouette framed by the vast expanse of stars. His hands rested on the console, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. The light from the display panels cast faint shadows across his face, deepening the lines etched there by years of command. His gaze was distant, fixed on the wreckage outside, but his mind was far away, lost in the faces of those he had sent to their deaths. The soft sound of footsteps broke the silence. Solana Eris approached, her presence quiet but undeniable. Her silver hair, streaked with ash, fell loosely around her shoulders, and her luminous eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. She hesitated for a moment, as if unsure of what to say, before stepping closer. "You didn't have to come," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "You could have stayed away. No one would have blamed you. But you came anyway." Voss didn't turn to face her. His eyes remained fixed on the stars, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the ship's systems. Then, finally, he spoke. "Because someone has to," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "If we don't stand up to tyranny, who will?" His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Solana studied him, her heart aching at the weight he carried. She could see the pain in his eyes, the guilt that gnawed at him for every life lost under his command. And yet, beneath it all, there was a fire, a fierce, unyielding determination that refused to be extinguished. "You gave us hope," she said, her voice trembling. "When we had none left. You showed us that we're not alone." Voss finally turned to look at her, his gaze steady. "Hope," he said, his tone softening. "That's what we're fighting for. Not just for survival, but for something better. For a future where people like you, like your people, don't have to live in fear." Solana's throat tightened, and she looked away, blinking back tears. The weight of his words, of everything they had endured, pressed down on her chest like a physical force. She thought of her people, scattered and broken, trying to rebuild their lives on a planet that would never be the same. She thought of the Marines who had fought so bravely, of the lives lost to give them this chance. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For everything." Voss nodded, his expression grave. "It's not over," he said. "The ZYRR will regroup. They'll come back. And when they do, we'll be ready." Solana met his gaze, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. "We'll fight with you," she said. "Whatever it takes." For a moment, they stood in silence, two figures bound by the shared weight of war. Outside, the stars burned brightly, indifferent to the struggles of those who fought beneath them. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a glimmer of something more, a fragile, flickering light in the darkness. Hope. As Solana turned to leave, Voss remained at the console, his gaze once again fixed on the stars. He thought of the lives lost, of the sacrifices made, and of the battles yet to come. The road ahead would be long and treacherous, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had stood against the darkness and they would stand again. The news of humanity's victory over the ZYRR spread like wildfire, carried across the stars by whispers of hope and defiance. For years, many species had lived in quiet fear, their voices silenced under the shadow of oppression. But now, they saw something they had long thought impossible: resistance. Humanity, a species once considered too young and fragile to survive the harshness of the galaxy, had stood against the ZYRR and prevailed. Their courage ignited a spark in the hearts of countless worlds. From the farthest reaches of the galaxy, emissaries began to arrive. They came in ships of every shape and size, their designs as diverse as the stars themselves. Some were sleek and elegant, crafted by ancient civilizations whose wisdom spanned millennia. Others were rough and utilitarian, forged by those who had scraped by on the edge of survival. But they all came with the same purpose: to find strength in unity. On Illyra Prime, the scars of battle were still fresh. The skies were clearer now, though the faint smell of ash lingered in the air. The ruins of cities stood as solemn reminders of what had been lost, but amidst the devastation, there was a growing sense of renewal. The Illyrans, resilient and proud, worked tirelessly to rebuild their shattered world. And in the heart of their capital, a great hall was erected, simple yet dignified, its walls lined with banners representing each species that had come together for this historic moment. The signing ceremony was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Representatives from dozens of species stood side by side, their differences forgotten in the face of their shared purpose. The air was charged with anticipation, a quiet hum of hope that seemed to radiate from every corner of the room. The Illyran sun filtered through the high windows, casting golden light over the gathering. It was as if the universe itself was watching, holding its breath. At the center of the hall stood President Marlowe, humanity's leader. Her presence was commanding, her voice steady and clear as she addressed the assembly. She wore no grand robes, no symbols of power, only the simple uniform of a leader who had endured alongside her people. Her eyes, weary yet unbroken, swept over the crowd. "Today," she began, her voice echoing through the hall, "we take the first step toward a brighter future. Together, we will ensure that no voice, no matter how small, goes unheard." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was silent. Then, slowly, the representatives began to applaud. The sound grew, rising like a wave until it filled the hall and spilled out into the streets beyond. It was not just applause, it was the sound of hope reborn, of countless worlds daring to believe in something greater. The Celestial Accord was born that day, a coalition of species united by a shared promise, to protect the innocent, to stand against tyranny, and to ensure that no one would ever face the darkness alone again. The Resolute floated quietly in orbit above Elira Prime, its once scarred hull now repaired. Inside, the crew moved with purpose, preparing for their next journey. The ship had become more than a vessel, it was a symbol of humanity's resilience, a beacon of hope that shone brightly against the endless void. In the observation deck, Captain Voss stood with Solana Eris, the Illyrian diplomat who had fought so fiercely for her people. The two of them gazed out at the planet below, its surface dotted with the lights of cities slowly coming back to life. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts and lingering questions. "Do you think the ZYRR will return?" Solana asked finally, her voice quiet but steady. There was no fear in her tone, only a calm determination. Voss's eyes hardened, his jaw tightening as he stared into the vastness of space. "If they do," he said, his voice low and resolute, "we'll be ready." Solana studied him for a moment, her luminous eyes searching his face. She saw the weight he carried, the burden of command, the guilt for those he couldn't save, and the unyielding fire that drove him forward. She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "I believe you," she said simply. The two of them stood in silence, watching as the human fleet began to ascend into the stars. The ships moved with quiet grace, their sleek forms glinting in the light of Elira's sun. They were a testament to humanity's strength, their very presence a declaration to the galaxy: humanity would not be broken. As the fleet disappeared into the void, Solana felt a strange mix of emotions. Loss and hope, sorrow and renewal. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel hopeless. She placed a hand on the cold glass of the observation window, her gaze following the fading lights of the ships. Across the galaxy, the seeds of the Celestial Accord began to take root. Worlds that had once been isolated and afraid now reached out to one another, building bridges where there had once been walls. Humanity, once seen as a fledgling species, had become a protector, a force for unity in a fractured galaxy. And yet, the shadow of the ZYRR lingered. Their defeat had been a blow, but not a death knell. Somewhere in the depths of space, they would be regrouping, their hive mind plotting its next move. But this time, they would not face a single species. They would face a united galaxy, bound together by courage and hope. As the Resolute vanished into the vast expanse, its engines a distant hum against the silence of space, Solana whispered softly to herself, her words carried away by the stars. "This is not the end. It's only the beginning."